All right. Well, we will pretend that we have an audience and trickle in at some point. So, welcome to our debate on the question, should Christians oppose Islamic laws against homosexuality? This debate topic was selected for the Liberals and Conservatives Facebook group. It was chosen by popular vote from a range of related topics. I would like to thank my opponent, Joe, for accepting my challenge to debate. As we were discussing our debate, Joe commented that this debate should be a good break from partisan bickering. I expect this to be a civil debate. Although this is certainly a high-stakes issue we're debating, it really is a battle of ideas and not merely of wills. We are trying to answer a question that is not often asked. What should the position of Christians be on Islamic laws against homosexuality? Christians are in a position to have some influence with government and with NGOs, and the policy for Christians to pursue should be based on biblical teaching, supplemented with an understanding of the circumstances we find ourselves in today. It is my purpose to make clear both the relevant biblical teaching and the application to specific circumstances. For Joe to win the debate, he will need to cast doubt on my interpretation of Scripture or argue for a different application. I will take a moment to introduce myself and to set the context for the debate, and then Joe will introduce himself. I'm a Christian, raised in a Christian home. I date my conversion to the summer of 2000, when I was 18 years old. I have a bachelor's degree in Bible, and I'm most of the way through a Master of Divinity degree. I have a blog at blogger.com called The Pilgrim Patriot, where I discuss society and politics from a Christian perspective. My interest in government policy on homosexual issues stems from a biblical vision for society and from challenges in society to the Bible's teaching on homosexuality. For the purposes of this debate, we will not spend a lot of time discussing whether the Bible opposes homosexuality. I will be treating that as a settled question, as it is for many in the audience. I will only briefly trace the biblical argument against homosexuality in order to lay a foundation for my case for leaving Islamic penalties for homosexuality alone. There are some in the Liberals and Conservatives group who do not accept that the Bible opposes homosexuality, and I may have to do a debate on that topic at some point in the future. We will also not address in this debate what policies and legislation regarding homosexuality, or I will not address what policies and legislation regarding homosexuality Christians should actively promote. The statement that I intend to prove is a purely negative one. Christians should not oppose Islamic laws against homosexuality. There's an important reason for this. Whether Christians live in an Islamic society or in a secularist one, they're in a minority in a more or less hostile environment. Christians do not dictate policy to the government. They are merely one among many groups that try to influence governments, and therefore this debate deals not so much with what policy should be as with the attitude of Christians toward existing policy. One final thing that we will not focus on here is the attitude that Christians should have toward Islamic rule and Islamic regimes in general. An Islamic country is, as I said, a more or less hostile place for Christians. The dangers that Christians face in Islamic countries are often life or death situations, whether the actions are perpetrated by the government or by elements of the general population. And Christian support of legal penalties for homosexuality, then, does not constitute an endorsement or even a toleration of Islamic law as a system. Our debate will be in three parts. We will each have an opening statement of 8 to 10 minutes. Then we will have 5 minutes each for rebuttals, for questioning and rebuttals, and then we'll go to 3 minutes each, and then for back and forth. So over to Joe.
Hello there, I'm Joe Shaffer. I want to take this opportunity to thank Owen for coming up with this idea and inviting me to do this debate and working so hard to make sure this happened. Part of the reason that I wanted to participate in this is that it's part of the reason that I participate in Liberals and Conservatives. I have a very strong belief that in America, the only way that we will ever move forward is if people of opposing viewpoints come together and share their ideas, come to understand how each other feel and think, and work together towards a common solution. I wanted to participate in this not only because of my interest in the particular topic, but also because I'd like to see this debate series move forward. I think Owen has come up with a really great concept, and I'd like to see this not be the only debate. Hopefully our performance here will encourage more. I'm going to do my best. I am a PhD student studying public administration in Washington, D.C. With a specialty in nonprofit administration. I come to this topic as a longtime member of the LGBT community, but also as someone who is raised in the faith tradition. I did my undergraduate in philosophy at a conservative Christian college. And soon after coming out, the first organization that I joined was actually Dignity, which is a group for gay Christians. I have wrestled with my faith from time to time, partially because of this issue. The one reason I've always at least remained agnostic and never actually walked away from the faith is my deep, deep belief that Christianity is a powerful force for good in human history. While things, I'm giving my introduction. I should stop, sorry. Let me stop there and I'll leave that for my introduction. But once again, thank Owen very much for setting up this, this topic, and hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on the topic.
Well, I think Joe is going to go first, make his opening statement, where he'll outline his position, and then I will outline mine, 8 to 10 minutes each, and then we will go to cross-examination.
Okay. As I was saying, I have a very deep and profound belief that Christianity is a powerful force for good in human history. Many of the social movements that have been successful in America found their roots and their motivation in the Christian faith. The abolitionist movement of the 1800s was founded in beliefs about Christian freedom and Christian justice. The civil rights movement was almost entirely populated by Christian reverends who had a very firm and secure belief in the fact that Christianity is an evolving force in human history, pushing us forward towards a more perfect society and a force for good that improves us all. Even today, while some may disagree with it, the pro-life movement is also a very powerful social movement that's attempting to bring their faith into actualization through changing social mores and changing social actions and changing social laws. While this is a controversial topic, it shows that Christians, when viewed and taken seriously, can be a force that can change government policy in the world. My position in this is that Christians should oppose the Islamic laws, not only within their own country, but also within, from externally, from their positions here in America. I will not argue that this should be a strenuous choice or it should be done necessarily at exposing themselves to their own danger. But there are multiple reasons why Christians should oppose the laws against homosexuality in Islamic states. The countries that have the death penalty for homosexuality are almost all exclusively Islamic. Christians, whether they oppose homosexuality or not, can still oppose unjust and extreme consequences for homosexuals. Just as they can oppose unjust laws that punish thievery by amputation, they can oppose the death penalty for homosexuals within Islamic countries. This will not only be a force for good globally, but also it would improve the standing of Christians around the world as seen as people who are willing to support the human rights of people that they even disagree with or don't feel are acting in proper ways. The second reason that they should is because, as Madison has taught us, that one of the ways that civil society is maintained is when the minority is protected from the majority. In order for a republic to exist and in such a way that it is not just a mob state where democracy overruns basic human rights and principles, it has to set down basic foundational ground rules about how people will be treated and whether the rights of minorities will be protected. Christians should oppose how homosexuals are treated, because throughout history, homosexuals are often the canary in the coal mine. One of the first groups that, along with Jews, that are often gone after are homosexuals. They've been subjected to a number of pogroms and genocidal treatment across history. The problem is that it's pogroms and genocidal actions. But the other problem is that it doesn't just stop there. It often just whets the appetite of authoritarian regimes and moves forward to persecuting other groups. This is particularly a key concern for Christians within Islamic societies, as they are minorities. And one of the reasons that Islamic societies, particularly in the Middle East, are unstable is that a civil society has not been built. Just holding an election does not create a state, as we saw in Libya. While elections were held, there was no civil society to prop up, create norms and values. Religion is one of the best ways that civilization has for transmitting morals and values and norms across the generations. It codifies certain principles and says that these are the things that we believe in, these are the things that we hold dear, and these are the things we will not variate from. And while some Christian faiths do have disagreement with homosexuality and homosexual practices, nearly all of them, in fact, I'm willing to say all of them, believe in the principles of life, that people should not be killed without good cause or reason. And I would submit that killing gay people is not a good cause or reason. This would improve the principles of civil society within inside Islamic countries, and it would therefore build a case and an existence where Christians would have greater protections for themselves. Not only would they be living their faith, living their values, bringing Christ's love and redemption into actuality within the world, but they would also be improving their own lot. And while I don't want to be so coarse as to say that merely improving their own lot is the way to go, it could be an added benefit. And from a faith perspective, I would also say that they should oppose the laws against homosexuality, simply because if Christians believe that homosexuality is wrong, then it is their job to display the redemptive love of Christ to these people and redeem them, so that way they can gain entrance to the kingdom of heaven. You cannot do that if you murder them. You cannot do that if they are put into a prison where you have no access to them. With these laws, they would actually be able to have access to these people, and they would be able to act out their faith and attempt to achieve their spiritual goals as they see fit, whether they oppose or are benign towards homosexuals and homosexual practices. Because of this, I believe that Christians should oppose Islamic laws against homosexuality. Now, as to the degree, I would say that they should not do things that would harm their own standing, let alone their own bodies and their own livelihoods. I'm not asking for Christians, especially within Islamic countries, to storm in the gates or to perform sit-ins. What I am asking is that when the topic comes up, that they should live their faith and argue for mercy, and argue for justice, and argue for even-handed penalties should they oppose homosexuality within these laws, so that they would improve the level of justice and therefore increase the level of Christ's love within the world. Thank you very much.
All right. I would like to say, starting out, that I appreciate the opportunity to have this debate with someone from the LGBT community. I do agree that it is beneficial to us as human beings and to us as a society to have opposing viewpoints come together and be heard, to listen to what each other have to say, and to work towards a common good. And this is, as Joe has mentioned, something that in a you have the opportunity to do in a civil society. Coming to the topic of the debate today, this is an issue that's very relevant for Christians, particularly in the West, and it's also relevant for anyone who's involved in public policy making who cares what policy positions Christians take. As Joe has mentioned, this is a religion, and Christianity in particular is a force for social change and for social improvement. Now, foreign policy requires evaluating and responding to human rights concerns under the rule of foreign governments. Not only does a non-Western nation's view of human rights affect the world that we live in, but it specifically has the potential to influence changes in Western nations. Whether or not you view Islamist terrorism as orthodox Islamic practice, it increases the pressure on Western countries both to tolerate Islamic Sharia law around the globe and to adopt it at home. Here in the US, the June 2016 shooting in a gay nightclub is a clear example of this. Of course, the question for Western nations to answer on policy is not what Islamist nations or Islamist terrorists want us to do. The question is what policies reflect their own beliefs and values. And within Western society, Christians specifically have to remain true to our faith, whether it lines up with Western secular society, with Islam, or with neither. There's much emotion that enters into the positions that people take on these issues. Although emotion plays a role in our decision-making, however, we must examine critically what it is that moves us emotionally. As we understand what our beliefs and values are, we'll be able to resist the emotional arguments of others and even to go against our own emotions if we have to. The question before us today is whether Christians should oppose Islamic laws against homosexuality. My position is that Christians should not oppose Islamic laws against homosexuality. I'll start by defining my terms. I define homosexuality as sexual acts between people of the same sex. This cuts across the mainstream claims about orientation. Whether you're attracted to people of one or of both sexes is a completely separate issue from whether you engage in sexual activity with someone of the same sex. The act in question could be committed by someone who identifies as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or just curious. I should note that not all Islamic laws dealing with issues related to homosexuality are this simple. Lesbianism is largely ignored in Islamic countries, according to The Guardian. Some of the Islamic country laws that LGBT activists object to deal with gender nonconforming behaviors or appearance rather than with sexual activity. I don't expect in this debate to address all of these laws, but I would suggest that the focus of this debate could be helpful for anyone who needs to evaluate other legal issues. I define Islamic laws as civil laws in a country or part of a country governed by Islamic Sharia law. Muslims also influence legislation in countries that are not Islamic. By focusing on Islamic nations and semi-autonomous regions, however, we can clarify what Christians ought to think and do about political Islam's position on homosexuality. I define Christians as people who profess to follow the Christian faith. I'm not offering a litmus test here of true Christian faith. We have the Bible for that, and we have churches that follow the Bible. These mark the boundaries of Christian faith and life, and therefore it is to the Bible that we ultimately appeal in issues of Christian duty. Not everyone who professes the Christian faith will go to heaven or can become part of a true church. However, everyone who is on the way to heaven and is part of a true church professes the Christian faith. The term should is a term that can relate either to moral obligation or to practical advisability. Christianity centers on the word, so the should for the Christian is a question of biblical teaching, first of all. We are warned not to lean to our own understanding, so we have to learn from the Bible what to think and what to do before we consider practically how to do it. The fact is that the Bible does have a position on homosexuality, both morally and civilly. Leviticus 18:22 states, "Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. It is abomination." And the chapter says that for offenses such as this, God's judgment came on the nations of Canaan. Leviticus 20:13 says, "If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them." Though the New Testament does not directly address the issue of a civil penalty, it is no less clear in its condemnation of homosexuality. Romans 1 identifies the root of homosexuality and God's judgment for rejection of his self-revelation. And it says that homosexuality is against nature. 1 Corinthians 6 says that homosexuals are among those who will not enter the kingdom of God. But it also talks about former homosexuals who have been washed, sanctified, and justified. It's well known that some laws of the Old Testament no longer apply for the Christian. There is some debate even among Christians about what this means. On civil laws, I hold to the position of the Westminster Confession of Faith. It says, "To them," that is to Israel also, "as a body politic, he gave sundry judicial laws, which expired together with the state of that people, not obliging under any now, further than the general equity thereof may require." On this principle of general equity, some civil laws and penalties do apply to society today. The clearest example of this is the law against murder, which goes back before Israel all the way to Noah. God said, "Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man." Here we see a law that was not limited to Israel, and a penalty that was based on God's created order. Man does not have the liberty to change either. Both criteria apply to homosexuality as well, and therefore the civil penalty for homosexuality stands. According to a Guardian article from last year entitled "Everything You Need to Know About Being Gay in Muslim Countries," Islamic laws against homosexuality are based mainly on God's punishment of Sodom and Gomorrah. The story of this in the Quran is similar to the story in the Bible. Whether you trace the Muslim understanding of this issue to nature or to the Bible, then, we come down to penalties for homosexuality being based ultimately on the revealed will of God. If you follow my argument this far, the only motivation for opposing Islamic laws against homosexuality that makes even a little sense for Christians is that opposition could undermine Islamic Sharia as a system. Christians globally have a lot invested in a secular system of government, with its freedom of religion and an emphasis on individual rights. Islamic theocracy runs counter to that. There are three problems with opposing homosexuality laws on secularist principles. One is that it pits Christians against Muslims on a moral issue on which Muslims are clearly in the right. Christians have enough problems with Muslims and Islamic government without creating new ones. The second problem is that the legal principle in question is one of natural law and not only written revelation. Unlike laws against blasphemy and apostasy, this law does not depend on any one religion being right. It is a law for all mankind. The final problem is that secular government is not, at the end of the day, a friend to Christianity. Its peace with Christianity is temporary and partial. We will not defeat the enemy of Islamic Sharia by casting in our lot with the enemy of godless secularism. I would like to close my argument by saying that Christianity is not a force of insurrection. It does not advocate a hostile takeover of secular governments, Islamic governments, or any other form of government. Christians work toward a better society by using good arguments and by living good lives. Any movement of social change that wants the authority of Christianity behind it must be in conformity with Christian teaching. And now I am ready for cross-examination.
Give me half a second to switch the timer.
Sure.
My initial rebuttal to your opening statement is that your definition of homosexuals and homosexual acts is too narrow. Within the wider Islamic community, to be arrested for homosexuality is not to be caught in the act. In fact, that is almost never the case. Recently, there was a case within Egypt where the government decided that an entire boatload of people who were on a cruise ship were all gay people. And they literally rounded up the entire population of the boat and moved them all to jail, where they were interrogated and some were tortured. This is, because of this, I would object to your definition of just being the specific acts. The problem is that homosexuality is not just the specific act. It's a state of being that many people associate not just with the act, but with the person. This is the position that the Islamic countries use when they arrest and torture gay people, is they're not torturing them for committing a specific act, merely for being who they are. Whether Christians oppose homosexuality or not, this sort of punishments, such as torture and death, are beyond the actual consequence of the crime. It goes beyond the levels of decency, much like, while Christians clearly, even when the New Testament and Paul claims that condemns homosexual acts, he also condemns people who steal things. In Islamic countries, people who steal things, in some of them, have their limbs amputated. This is something that a Christian could oppose, even if they didn't believe that stealing things was a good thing. The actual penalty of the crime is excessive and indecent. As far as Christians within Islamic countries attempting to change the laws, while no secular government can claim to be a friend of Christianity, because Christianity is of another world, not this world, Christians need to engage within their world, especially within Islamic countries, because they are a minority. They are in a weaker position. They will not be able to defend themselves from some of the penalties of Islamic law if they are completely cut off and isolated from the rest of the society that they exist in. They need to engage civilly and engage in a dialogue, even on the terms of Islam, whether they like it or not, because that is the society that they live in. They are in a powerless position, and they need to learn the field that they are going to be playing on. And this is one of the reasons that they should oppose the laws against homosexuality. Not only do they have a common moral basis which discuss these things with Islamic countries, but they are essentially Nixon, who is going to China. They can claim to be just as opposed morally to homosexual laws, but be able to, on that common basis of understanding, to argue with Islamic rulers and say that just as God is the most merciful, so must we be merciful. We must live our faith and actualize it within the world. We are the prayers that we live with our lives. So in this way, they would engage civilly with their rulers, build relationships, build connections, build commonalities with them that would not only advance the level of decency and justice within the world, but also advance the safety of the Christian faith within these countries.
I'd like to, so we're doing, let me ask for a point of clarification here. Are we doing,
now it's your turn to do a rebuttal to my opening statement, and then at that point we can do interrogations with each other. That's the 3 minutes.
Okay, so now my 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes to
rebut my arguments.
Your arguments, okay. All right. All right. Let's see here. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, go.
So you in your opening statement, you said that the death penalty for homosexuality is almost exclusively in Muslim countries. and you argued that it was an extreme penalty. And now, again, in my position, I am using, as you say, a narrow definition of homosexuality, and admittedly, the Islamic definition. I can't speak as an expert on this, but I can certainly say that that in general it does not use a narrow definition, and so on that basis, we can argue that the crime is not as well defined as it should be, and that would be certainly where you have the death penalty for something that should not be a crime. Then you have, or any penalty, but especially the death penalty, you do have an issue there. Now, as far as when we come to the narrow definition of homosexuality, there is where we would perhaps have a substantial disagreement, in that the death penalty is prescribed by Scripture, and we would have to say that that it is commensurate with the offense. I'll maybe come back to that after I address the other arguments, depending on how much time I have. What you said about the minority being protected from the majority in civil society, as I said in my statement, that is a concern, and we can certainly see where we're arguing for the kind of society that we have in secular countries, where protecting one group's rights leads to protecting another, and certainly we do want to move away from Islamic theocracy. So there is that issue there, but again, as I said, the position of Christians has to be based both morally and civilly on what the Bible teaches, because the Bible does speak to both, and we put the Bible above our own understanding. And then finally, what you said about the job of Christians being to love homosexuals, that is, I would make a distinction there between the mandate of civil government and the mandate of Christians, as individuals. As the civil government has a responsibility to promote virtue and to discourage evil in society, and it has some guidelines on which it does that. And within whatever civil society Christians find themselves, there is the responsibility to love people of whatever crime, whatever sin, and to seek to win them, and that can be done on an individual level, and it can also be done on the level of public policy, but only insofar as public policy agrees with what the Bible teaches us about love and about justice.
Okay. Great.
Do I have time left?
You had a minute. Do you want to keep going?
Yes.
Okay.
Going back to the idea of the death penalty for homosexuality being extreme, again, dealing here with the narrow definition, as I like to take a moment to defend the Bible's position on that, on the punishment for the narrow definition of homosexuality. The Bible's vision of mankind as in families, as relating to one another in such a way as to promote reproduction and human flourishing within the family unit, is for the good of society. And anything that goes against that does cause harm to society and to individuals. That harm may not always be immediately apparent, but there is harm, and the deeper you look and the longer it goes, the more that harm will be apparent. So that is my argument why the biblical penalty for homosexuality is justified.
Okay, good. 6 seconds. That's great timing. Now we enter a phase where 3 minutes for both commentary and then questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My main response would be, first off, Christianity has long been a force that has not stood back and seen secular government as necessarily something that exists separate from them. As their mission is to increase the amount of good and justice that exists within the world, they've seen the secular government as a tool that they can harness to attempt to put their vision of what justice and good is within the world. As far as we can see this within the civil rights movement, but also within the pro-life movement. Both of these things, one of the main reasons that Roy Moore, no matter what you feel about him, the single biggest reason that voters in Alabama have cited for voting for him is because that he is pro-life and he stands for life and he stands for this principle that the state will not sanction murder. I am saying that if Christians are going to live this position, that it should not be a pick and choose sort of thing. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that this means that we should just go to people who mass murder and give them a hug and send them on their way. I would never argue such a thing. However, what I am arguing is that the laws that they should be opposing are the ones that are excessively harsh and as far as engaging with the secular government, unfortunately in Islamic countries, it's not a secular government. It is a religious government. It is a government that has has set one religion as its standard and said that from here on out, this is the standard that they're going to use. These are the rules that Christians are going to have to operate by within these countries. And I do think that forming a common bond and forming a common understanding on a faith level with Islamic countries is a key to engaging with them. But I also think that engaging with them, especially along the lines of the death penalty for homosexuality, while within the Old Testament, this was the penalty that was laid down, Christ did come to give a New Testament that was based more on redemptive love and having the kingdom gone within ourselves rather than in a temple in Jerusalem. So I would ask you, and I would shoo my cat away, that what do you feel a Christian's responsibility is within the world to actualize both their faith, especially on the qualities of justice?
Christians do have a responsibility to seek justice in civil society, to influence secular governments, to change them in a direction of justice. And when we talk about the death penalty or any penalty for homosexuality, I do see room for an argument for reform. Now, as far as trying to overturn the death penalty, I don't see that as a legitimate long-term goal for this any more than I would for murder or any other capital offense that is defined by Scripture. Now, there could be arguments that it is being improperly applied, such as, for example, the government identifies people as gay, as homosexual, not on the basis of their actions, but on the basis of arbitrary criteria that set them in a certain category. As Christians, we are concerned when it comes to homosexuality with actions, and the other aspects of identity and of how people see themselves as people relate to that action. If their identification and their lifestyle is geared towards promoting that act, towards protecting that act, then that act is the issue, and their justification of that act is problematic.
Okay, you still have 30 seconds.
I'll, with that 30 seconds, I will say that the death penalty is a very extreme penalty, and it should be used with caution.
One of the problems that, one of the problems with human beings is that what ostensibly is set up to be an instrument for justice and force of good can often be warped and manipulated for the ends of evil. One of the reasons that these laws should be opposed by Christians is how that they have been warped and misused by Islamic countries to maintain authoritarian regimes rather than to uphold any kind of vision of a greater spiritual life. The prime example that I would bring up is Malaysia within the 1990s. The ruler of that country at the time was seeing his former student that he had brought up through the ranks break away from him, and then rise against and strive against his mentor within the parliament, within the party that they existed within. He used the charge of homosexuality against his former student as a way of imprisoning him, and thus making it illegal for him to be a member of parliament. He used it as a political weapon to beat this man in a way that he couldn't do politically because he was quite popular. In this way, he propped up his authoritarian rule, even though it was ostensibly within a democratic and Republican construction, by using the laws against homosexuality, specifically in the ways that they were applied, to enforce and persecute what was a political minority. In the same way, I would argue that this is just unjust. It is unjust on the face of it. By leaving the laws so vague and fuzzy, especially when things are not as defined as simply something that could somehow support homosexuality. Such as the way, to take a perfectly secular example, one of the ways that Vladimir Putin has been able to solidify his role is by establishing any laws that say that it's illegal to promote homosexuality to children. However, that has completely banished any discussion of homosexuality from the public sphere because children are everywhere. But also, he's been able to use the charge to go after any civil service organizations that are attempting to promote Republican rule within Russia, using the charge of promoting homosexuality simply because homosexuality is more common in Western countries. So this is also why these tools can be turned against Christians very easily whenever they need to, and that way they can go after Christians using charges of homosexuality, like within the Catholic Church, as a way of bludgeoning their religious minorities.
Is that a question?
That was not a question. I ran out of time.
Okay.
I apologize.
All right. So where are we on the discussion here? I'm a little.
At this point, we're going back and forth and limiting it to 3 minutes.
Okay.
When did you want to quit? We got about 5 minutes left according to the clock, but to go farther if you want to keep the discussion going.
Tell you what, I'll do a 3-minute response, and then we can have dialogue, if that sounds good.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. So what we really have here are, I think we're talking past each other to some extent, in that I am focused, and I would argue the Bible is focused on a narrow definition of homosexuality, what it means, what it looks like, and on responding to that. Now, where it comes to the broader question and how that's used or misused, certainly there are concerns, and there is a place, a needed place for Christians to pursue reform and to pursue justice in society, so that people are not punished disproportionately, and that they are not punished for something that should not be a crime. So we have a mandate to seek justice, to condemn injustice, and that works toward the common good, and also toward better conditions for Christians. Now that mandate is not something that can be disconnected from the overall Christian ethic or the overall Christian message. And my point in saying that is that there's only so far we can go in partnering with people to combat abuses. There comes a point where partnering with people who have a different agenda becomes counterproductive. If they're trying to normalize and to legalize homosexuality, that's not something that Christians can get on board with. Whereas we might be able to cooperate on more limited things, such as clarifying the law on homosexuality, such as appropriate penalties for related offenses, and so forth. The other thing that I would say on that issue of social change is that the ability of political action to improve society is limited, and Christians have to put their priority on where the power is. The power is in the gospel. The power is in people being saved and being brought into the church. And it's within the church that you see society, that we hope to see society as it should be. Okay.
That was the one time we reached time.
Okay, great. All right.
Yeah.
So.
And we're right at 12:30.
All right. How long do you want to take for the?
I think 10 minutes of dialogue, but also, 10 minutes of dialogue, and then let's reassess where we are.
Okay.
I would say that I think to a certain extent we have reached a point of commonality. You point out that the biblical prescriptions cannot be, while justice and mercy are important to Christianity, they can't be separated from the biblical prescriptions against homosexuality. And I think essentially that's exactly what I was arguing, only from the reverse. I would argue that no matter what the textualism is, if clinging to the textualism divorces you from the essence of Christian love and essentially the redemptive love of Christ, you've lost what makes Christianity really what it is. I mean, if there's one thing in the Gospels, it's that Christ is coming back to redeem the human race because God loves everybody. I mean, that's the essence of the faith. And I wouldn't ask people that don't believe, have a moral objection to homosexuality to drop that moral objection. I wouldn't belittle it. I know they take it seriously. I know it's part of their faith. I can live with somebody, having that kind of moral prescription. It would be easier to live with if we could all agree that we don't throw gay people off of the tops of buildings. I think that's really the kind of opposition that I'm looking for from the Christian faith community. I certainly would never ask anybody in an Islamic country, a Christian Islamic country, to I mean, literally just self-sacrifice, in an attempt to gain mercy for homosexuals. But I definitely do think that it's how can you be a Christian and go along with, mass murder of an entire population? That's the opposition that I'm looking for, and the one that I'm really kind of arguing.
I agree with you that we have some commonality here, and a possible way forward in improving conditions for everybody in Islamic countries, specifically. And I wish that more people could understand where Christians are coming from, like you do. That would make it easier to avoid conflict and to have cooperation with other critics and opponents of Islamic Sharia law. And I hope that this debate and this discussion can raise awareness of both the potential for cooperation and also the danger of neglecting that potential.
Yes.
So, and again, like I said, I'm not advocating for a change in any laws, in a direction that you and I, or excuse me, let me say this, in a direction that you would find objectionable, or that perhaps the LGBT people in general would find objectionable. All I'm arguing for is an approach to social and political change that is limited by scriptural teaching. And I think our approach to social change should be limited and motivated, I should say, by scriptural teaching. And I would say that the better potential allies in social and political causes understand what the biblical teaching is and are willing for that to shape the way that they approach these things, the more potential there will be for cooperation.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree that there needs to be a common base of understanding. I think one of the real problems that we have in our country today is that because of the greater amount of information, I mean, literally practically no one has a private thought anymore. I mean, there were plenty. I remember when I was a kid growing up back in the 70s, there were things said within groups that would never be repeated outside of that group. Today, that those things are still said, but they're broadcast completely everywhere. There's no way that they're there. And if anyone had heard some of the things that I heard, the blue collar guys at the American Legion saying, they would be drummed out of society today because they were racist and homophobic and just terrible. The problem is that I think that we have a society, we're at a point where we're experiencing this, especially within our generation. Within our generation, there was a time you didn't say these things in public. There was that social norm that these things are verboten in public discourse. I think we're slowly coming around to the understanding that while people are going to believe things that you don't like, you can't make that a disqualifier for participation within the public sphere.
And it goes both ways.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's no way that you're going to find a point of commonality you know, the whole way this country is constructed is that things don't move forward unless there's a commonality and a consensus. The founders constructed our government specifically for that point, so that way there is no authoritarian rule that bulldozes everyone over. The problem is that if you plant your flag and you say, you know, agree to all my terms or I'm going home, everyone stays at home and nothing gets done. And that's pretty much what has happened over the last 10 years, which is also why I'm so enthusiastic about this debate and participating in it, is because I mean, like, you know, just by talking to each other and explaining our beliefs and, you know, just creating the space where you can state these beliefs in a way that we can come to a common understanding, I think is the only way that we're going to, you know, I would never expect you to come 100% to my side of what I believe. I would never expect anyone. Heck, half the time I don't believe 100% of what I believe. But I do think that without coming to a point where we can listen to each other without freaking out and coming to the understanding of where someone else is coming from and believing that they're coming from a good-hearted place when they say these things, that's going to be the only way that we're really going to be able to come to a level of understanding.
I'd like to take the conversation in a personal direction, if
Sure.
you don't mind. You had mentioned your wrestling with Christianity, and that you're in a place where you still struggle with accepting it, but at the same time, you're not to the point of saying it that it has no value, or even no value for you personally. I guess my question for you would be, what is that struggle like for you, and what could I possibly do to help you with that?
I mean, part of what you're doing, part of what you could do to help me is what you're doing right now. You know, just like I said, creating that space where things can be discussed. The first gay pride parade I ever went to, I actually marched in, and I marched with my church, Dignity, which was actually a gay church. And along the way, Fred Phelps and his church had a section they had a bevy of cops around them, and literally just screamed the most heinous, awful things. I mean, I was 22 years old, just out of college. I didn't think that, you know, I really hadn't seen that kind of ugliness before. And the fact that they did it in Christ's name, there is a lot of ugliness towards gay people.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, I think I have a fundamental belief that evil exists in the hearts of men. I'm sure that I'm actually quoting a comic book at this moment. I think that we seek to justify. We know what's wrong. We know when we're being gratuitously cruel. We seek to justify engaging and indulging in the cruelty. There are people that will use Christianity to justify their indulgence in just heinous cruelty. What I struggle with are the other Christians. I can look at those people and I can look at Fred Phelps and say, you simply do not represent the faith. I mean, the Christianity I grew up with was the Christianity that fed the poor, that clothed the homeless, that told people that they were loved, even when no human being to them seemed to love them. They told them that there was someone out there that actually did love them. The problem is that there are too many Christians out there that when the Fred Phelpses of the world stand up and engage in just gratuitous cruelty, look at that and say, not my circus, not my monkeys. Doesn't have anything to do with me. My ox isn't being gored. I can claim that these people are the aberrant force. They are the devil masquerading as Christians. That washes me of responsibility. I have no place in intervening in this. I have no place in criticizing the way that these, because even if they believe that homosexuality is wrong, even if they embrace the biblical teachings against homosexuality, and that's an argument we can have at a later date. When you have people who are, just literally being evil in Christ's name, and you stand silent, I haven't lost faith in God. I've lost faith in Christians. That's it. That's it right there. That's the essence of it. I don't feel like when it comes to Christianity and homosexuality, real Christians, the people who live Christ's love, who actualize Christ's redemptive love in the world, do not feel like they have to do it with homosexuality. It's almost, I grew up as the handicapped child. I'm missing a foot. I'm missing a couple fingers. I feel like it's almost like on a society-wide level that gay people are the handicapped kid on the playground that the bullies come looking for to beat up. And when they do, the other kids gather around to watch rather than stop it. And I almost feel like that the Christian churches that exist today are the kids that are around in the circle, watching it and almost tempted to join in. That's why. I have other reasons. Every church that you get two people together, you create politics. In every faith community I've ever been in. I remember one time, because I was on the board of directors of Dignity. It's a Catholic organization. There was one guy who had a master's degree in liturgical studies and a master's degree in canonical law. And we had an hour-and-a-half argument about whether the priest would wear stoles at the altar. These are also the kind of things that drive me away. But the thing of it is if that was the only thing that was there, I would probably still be in there slugging it out, participating in the faith. Because I'll tell you, I'm a trans person. I hesitated to accept this invitation because I know that in the comments when we post this video, there's going to be ugliness. I almost emailed you and told you to prepare yourself. There's going to be a level of ugliness. And I had to question whether I was going to expose myself to that. And what hurts me is that some of that ugliness is going to come from a Christian perspective. You cannot believe the number of people in the LGBT community that feel not that they've left Christianity, but that they were driven out. And I think that is a wound that can be healed, but only if we can come together and really talk about it and discuss it.
Well, I do want to say that I love you, and God loves you. And I hope that we can see some progress on this, both on an individual level and on a larger level.
Yeah.
Now, I think I will say it's difficult to intervene on behalf of people whose positions and lifestyle you strongly disagree with.
Sure.
And I think that sometimes there isn't space for that, honestly. But I think that the more conversations like this that we have, the more interventions there will be.
Yeah.
And the better understanding and cooperation, love and respect all around you'll see.
Yeah. I would almost ask, if someone did intervene, whose soul would you be saving? The gay person or the Fred Phelps? I think in that moment, there's a moment to try to persuade a gay person to your point of view when it comes to biblical teachings. But I think in those moments when someone is, I mean, and again, I'm not saying opposing homosexuality, but I mean the kind of gratuitous, just indulgence of cruelty. In that moment, your intervention isn't there to save the soul of the gay person. Your intervention is to save the soul that's indulging in the cruelty. To say to them, brother, you've fallen off the path. That there's a way to go about this, and this is not the way that you are using dark methods and dark ideas to try to accomplish, even if it's a goal that you personally might agree with. The method, the end doesn't justify the means.
I think there's more of that intervention on a personal level than you may see.
And then that's the problem, is that gay people aren't seeing this. This is something that's going on in churches privately off to the side, and we're not hearing about it. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. If the only point of contact we have with your church is the guy that comes to scream at us at events, that's the face of your church.
Yeah. But one of the things about groups like this is that they pester everybody. They don't just pester homosexuals. I had a conversation with a man like this. It wasn't, I don't think he was associated with Fred Phelps, but he was coming from a similar perspective. And I was at a Christian university at a Bible conference, and he was there to protest because he didn't think that this very conservative Christian school took a hard enough line on homosexuality. And I had a conversation with him. My wife, just before we were married, she was with me at the time. And I talked to him. I asked him why he was there, and we talked about different things. And he was rude and offensive. And eventually I just had to walk away. But I did try. And others tried as well. And I think if you stick around Christians enough, you'll see those conversations. You'll see those things happening. It does happen some in the public eye too. You'll see conservative Christians, Christian thought leaders, publicly criticizing people like Fred Phelps. It's out there.
Richard Land.
Yeah,
I don't agree with Richard Land on a lot of the topics, but I do respect the man. There have been points where people have come out and really done some heinous things, and he has stepped up to the plate and said, no, this is out of bounds. This is a place we can't go. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and honestly, I mean, Pat Robertson. If I got an invitation to engage in dialogue with Pat Robertson, it would not happen. If it was somebody like Richard Land, I would be able to look at him and see, even though we don't disagree, that he does have the integrity to kind of stand up for those in those moments. And at that point, I mean, I would be more open to a dialogue with him, simply because he does take those stances, and I've seen it. I know about it. Yeah.
I can say one other thing about people like Fred Phelps. It's not just a failure of Christian virtue that you see there. There is some seriously aberrant theology.
Yes.
There.
Yeah.
Their view of sin, their view of salvation is way off.
Yeah.
And that is something that needs to be answered. And again, as you said, there are some who do answer that, and perhaps there could be more of a response to that.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully, in exchanges like this, hopefully we're building those kind of bridges where these kind of things can happen. So, well, I thought this was a very productive discussion.
So did I.
Hopefully this will be the only one that we have. Perhaps we can get other people within the group to participate and argue. Perhaps they won't be quite as heavy in theology, since it is a politics discussion group, but perhaps we can get Andrew to argue some economics or something.
That would be interesting. I'd like to watch that.
Yeah. But thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to participate. This has been a very rewarding experience.
Thank you.
Great.